All right, so welcome. Grab a seat if you don't have one. If we've not met before, I'm Mark Saddam. I'm the Executive Director of what is now called UNH Innovations, which you might have heard a little bit about in the paper over the last month. It's sort of a reimagining of the university's economic development mission. So it's beyond licensing and tech transfer, but more a holistic view of the university as a resource for economic prosperity. That's a good way to say it. Or not, but that's what I'm saying. So the concept of the seminar series this year is the Lean Startup. So just as a quick survey, how many people have heard of that before they walked in the door today, the concept of Lean Startup? Okay. So you have some converts,
good.
Some who don't. And the reason we picked this is because it's a very trendy thing, and I don't say that diminutively. I mean, it's a really positive, powerful business trend that's going right now. Personally, I teach classes on this, and what I tell the students is that if I had understood this stuff when I was at my last job, which was running a little biotech company, I probably would have saved our investors $3 to $4 million. So I feel bad for them. I spent their money anyway. So since you probably aren't sitting on $3 to $4 million of your own money to waste, these are really good principles to go through, and helps you get to figure out whether the business is actually viable or not early. So to my left is Jamie Coughlin. You might remember him from the ABI Innovation Hub, but recently switched up to Dartmouth, and I couldn't possibly remember what your title was, but is doing a lot of work with undergraduate students too. And you're going to talk about customer development, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. Hello, everybody. I'm Jamie. So way of introduction, New Hampshire native. Got bit by the entrepreneurial bug when I was an undergraduate, and so I'm a big proponent of bringing entrepreneurial education to kind of the higher ed scene. For the past 3.5 years, took over the ABI Innovation Hub, which some of you may have had some experience with, which is located in Manchester, and kind of took it through a little bit of a transformation to make it more focused on high tech, innovation. In the process, created such things as the Tech Out Startup Competition, which is the state's largest startup competition. Brought some of that energy to the Rochester area with the Startup Rochester, which was a business plan competition there. So just a big proponent of kind of this live free and start mentality through the state. I really think we're a small enough state that interactions with people like Mark and Mark Kaplan of the ICC here matter. We are only 1.2 million people, and the better I think we can coordinate all these efforts, I think the more likelihood that we can obviously share the resources with all of you who are out there, really being the risk takers and the entrepreneurs of the day that hopefully can take our great state forward. So recently, this past July, I had a unique opportunity to present itself. Dartmouth was kind of beginning to think about how they transform their entrepreneurial mission, and had the great opportunity to take over a position basically to oversee all new venture creation at the college and incubation at the college. So they kind of go hand in hand. And so similar to UNH's effort of kind of bringing together, Dartmouth created a new office of entrepreneurship and tech transfer to really bring these two worlds of creating great intellectual property amongst its students, faculty, alums, et cetera, together with the new venture process, which is obviously taking that outside of the labs and actually putting it into practice. So that's a great opportunity. I highly encourage all of you to check that out, and whatever I can do personally to support. But the reason Mark invited me tonight was him and I are pretty big proponents of this lean startup methodology, which is kind of sweeping across the past few years. Some of you know, I'll touch upon a little bit at a high level, but really the segmentation that we're going to talk tonight is obviously this cute little slide in front of you, which is how do you actually maybe, before you're going to start building something, go out and actually talk to your customers, solicit feedback. It doesn't sound like rocket science, and it really isn't. It's actually kind of logical, kind of intuitive. But I think the actual effort that goes into it and to do it well is very challenging. And hopefully tonight can offer some insights. So before I begin, because I haven't met most of you, just give me a sense, and you can kind of just shout it out. Where are you all coming from? Are you part of a startup? Are you thinking about an idea? Are you more on the service end, trying to bring some of these ideas to your own clients? And just shout it out.
All of the above.
All the above? Okay, that's fair. Well, so raise a hand. Who's working on or has an idea or has interest in actually building a startup? Okay, so like half the room. And of those people that are building a startup, would you say it's more of kind of an established, the small business arena, or is it maybe more innovation, technology-based startups? So small business, established arena, techie, kind of innovative, web. Okay.
Oh, low-tech innovative.
Low-tech innovative, okay. And then I would assume the rest of you that didn't raise your hands, is it fair to say that you're kind of maybe more on the service end and trying to bring some ideas to clients? And okay, great. So hopefully this will, hopefully we can get a takeaway here. So as you said, that's my kind of my info. So before I begin, the lean startup is definitely something new in respects to kind of laying out this roadmap to say, hey, before you actually begin the build process of whatever product or service you're going to do, go out, ascertain as much feedback as possible, see if there's a market for that, and then bring that kind of back into the build process. And the reason for that is probably 8, 9 out of 10 times our own intuition when we first have an idea about the size of a market, the ability of a customer to even want that product or service and or pay for it is probably wrong. However, and this is where I just wanted to make this point, so this is Henry Ford. And I think it's safe to say he was a visionary. And I do think there's those people among us that are those kind of visionary types that do see the world very differently and have actually the intuition to kind of nail a market, nail a future market. Some people say maybe Steve Jobs kind of had that ability. And so this is this famous quote that Henry Ford had, and I absolutely loved it. I think I even had it at the ABI in Manchester. If I'd asked my people or my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Right? So again, that vision. And I just throw that out there because I do think there's an element of that. So if any of you have that special gift, go for it. But I think most of us is going to be applicable to what we're talking about tonight and really ascertaining feedback prior to actually building something. And so, so what's the big deal with this, lean startup? I think prior to that, we had always heard about the business plan and the creation of a business plan. We know who this is, right? Iron Mike. So he had this famous quote that I also love, which is all his opponents always had this plan, and he said, that plan went out the window the moment they got punched in the face. And I think that's a little bit of this indication of, traditional business plans. The exercise is great, but sometimes through the creation of a very large document, a lot of people spend times on assumptions, intuitions, putting their thoughts on a paper and trying to get the plan perfect prior to actually going out in the real world. And I think the whole point of this talk tonight is you got to get out of the office and actually go and touch the real world to ascertain as much feedback before you even begin kind of a build. And this is a funny little tweet that somebody had. I don't read fiction, but when I do, it's a 100-page business plan with a 5-year projection and all the numbers going to the right? I mean, ask yourselves, because I think we've all probably have been through the planning process, and we tend to be our own worst enemy and make it look really good. Just think about your own lives, right? And so while it's cute, while it's funny, it's I think it does have definitely repercussions. So why do we have the lean startup? The 3 core concepts here. We're favoring experimentation over the elaborate planning process that traditionally has been through the business plan process. Customer feedback over our own intuition, however smart we may think we are. An iterative design over traditional spending of a lot of dollars upfront to build something and then go kind of out in the market and test it. So those 3 concepts kind of, in theory, everybody subscribe to, okay with? Okay, great. So part of the lean startup focuses around this business model canvas, and there's, as you can see, several categories that it encourages you to kind of boil your world down. Tonight we're really focused on the 2 that are kind of highlighted in blue. Identifying, hey, who are my customers that I could begin to ascertain this feedback from? And once I kind of have that, how does that generate some sort of value proposition that is different, unique in the marketplace, but that is ultimately validated by people that you've actually talked to? And I think that's the big difference. So this kind of graph focuses around, again, this customer development from an interactive standpoint. So it's step one, customer discovery, right? You're going out there, and that's what I'm going to really focus on tonight, because what I've spent some time on is putting together just some, suggestions, best practices on actually how does that solicitation of feedback from customers really work, and I think that'll be really insightful. But ultimately, customer discovery leads to this customer validation. And this hot buzzword that's around right now, this grand pivot word, I think it even extended to Mr. Coughlin back there in the ICC in his recent article just a few days. The ICC is pivoting, so it's definitely getting some great traction. But if there is no customer validation, right, you're going out with this kind of this theory that you have, and if you're not getting the validation, what you do is you pivot back to the customer discovery. And then you kind of keep completing that cycle until you actually do get some validation, positive validation from customers, in which you can begin and kind of execute on that, which is I'm going to begin to build some sort of product and service, actually investing dollars in that product and service, and then you can ultimately create a business. So customer development, I think, is the action or the output that we're going to talk about tonight is really around the interviewing process. So again, getting out of the office and going and talking to customers and actually interviewing them to solicit feedback. So I think the first step is just, we're gonna kind of go very basic here, so it doesn't surprise you. How do you find customers? How do you find customers to solicit? Anybody out there want to kind of throw some ideas out? Which is very basic, yeah.
You go and look at the space that you're thinking about entering. Mm-hmm. You look at other people who are in the space. Yep. Yep. In our case, we're looking at doing a business to do girls' clothes, toys, and doll things. And so one of the things we're doing is we go places where girls gather, like dance studios and gymnastics studios, where the parents typically have extra money to spend, so they're our target audience. Yep. But we're looking for distribution channel. Yep. So those are prime distribution channel, talking to those people and understanding what motivates them to be part of the line. Yep, absolutely.
No, I think that's brilliant, right? So just like, again, intuitive, but sometimes challenging, which is just your, who are your natural audience.
Well, you can't assume what will entice them to be part of your line. Yep. Because I sometimes go and think, okay, they'll want to do this. They'll want cash. Yep. It's not what they want. Yep. They want exposure. Yep. They won't. Yep.
So you just may have natural connections to that market, right? But for example, I'm in this broad category of kind of economic development, and maybe I have a desire of creating an online tool to help customers do X, but I don't really have any natural customers in that world. I think another one is just, we can never shortchange just introductions, right? Leveraging one's network to kind of get introduced to potential like beta users and or just folks that could solicit feedback. Another great one that maybe doesn't come to mind is, many of us, maybe more so on the service side, have skill sets that can be shared through talks like this, in which I can give talks and, hey, I'm in front of 50, 60 people. Those are people maybe I can solicit feedback from before. In the virtual world, many of us are familiar with webinars, right? So taking a topic that is of kind of in your domain and putting on a webinar to an audience, just for the sake of transfer of knowledge, creates an audience of which your intention is then to follow up with that audience to ask, hey, I also have this other potential idea that I'm working on. Can I solicit some feedback from you? And so the reason I say this is because I think sometimes with the lean startup and customer validation, I do think quantity matters in terms of the amount of people you're gonna kind of hit. I think sometimes people do a few interviews, few solicitations of feedback, Sometimes they're probably from family and friends, which is, I think, a mistake, and I'll get to that later. And so you don't want to shortchange yourself. You really want honest feedback, and I think the more people that are separate from you in specific fields, the better. So in the past, when you're kind of thinking about soliciting feedback and interviewing customers, I have personally always fallen into this trap, which is, hey, Mark, would you use this little product that I kind of built, and how much would you pay for it? And as I kind of continue, I'm going to paint this as the wrong way to go about it, because it kind of sets you up for certain answers that maybe lead you to a different outcome. So these are, I think, very natural questions to ask potential prospects and potential customers, but I think it's the wrong way to go about it. So 2 rules of maybe what not to do. A, don't talk about your idea. So don't talk about the specific thing that you have in your mind, whether it be a product or service. And second, do not ask about the future. Right? We kind of want real data, and the future, or soliciting feedback about the future can be maybe problematic in terms of the direction it leads you. So I think the 5 things we do want to position and begin to ask are the following. I'll give you just a second to kind of scan them. But I think you can see as you kind of read these, the subtle difference in positioning, but it begins to kind of create a conversation. And so I think the key here is just to get to a certain level of openness with the customer, right? They are just a human being that you're having a conversation with, and that you're doing less talking about your little gizmo that you created and trying to solicit more about what are some of the problems that they're faced with in a given area that relates to your product, but get them to start soliciting some or offering up some advice.
So Jamie, why not ask them about why shouldn't you ask them about what you don't like about your product?
Hold that thought.
So I'll get to this. So this is an example. So this is an example that I've seen and read about before. You guys, and so Yelp is obviously a web-based product, and my background is kind of more in, I guess, web, internet, startups, etc. But I think these principles, as you can quickly see, apply to across the board, which is to give some tangibility to it. So imagine you're building Yelp for vegetarians.
What is Yelp?
So Yelp is a web platform for recommendations for potential places to eat based on price, location, style of food. So it's just a big kind of database. It's on the it's an app on the mobile phone, etc. So it's just a widely populated platform to discover foods in your local area based on taste, etc.
Restaurants, not groceries.
Restaurants, sorry. Yeah. So this specific one is somebody has an idea to build one for a very segmented population, which is vegetarians, right? So why don't you think we should kind of like ask this particular question?
It doesn't have to be a vegetarian restaurant. You have vegetarian food.
And it doesn't have to be a new city.
Because you're assuming it's hard in the first place.
Yeah.
Yep, and it also introduces just the variability of comments and reactions around a new city. And how about this one? Right, again, it just opens the door for a lot of different feedback.
Yeah, and again, you're assuming it's hard to be a vegetarian, yeah.
And so this is, maybe the more appropriate. So you are definitely assuming and hopefully amassing people that have kind of the vegetarian inclination. So I think that's fair. But remember, in a conversation, you don't want to keep it so open-ended that you start getting information that just is noise. And so, and this is really the tough part. This is, I think, what the takeaway will be is the really tough part of all of this is really coming up with that kind of that problem statement of what you really kind of want to focus on. So question 2 of that 5-question array that I suggested were maybe some of the areas to focus on. Can you tell me about the last time that happened? The reason we're kind of positioning this way is, again, stories or the art of storytelling are obviously entering into a conversation. Just leads us down areas in which we can kind of garner more information, as opposed to just a yes or no. Ooh, it fell. Sorry. As opposed to just a blanket yes or no type of question. So I think this is kind of the point, in the talk where you can kind of see why these questions are appropriate as opposed to just maybe more survey oriented. Do you like this? Does this product get you excited? Yes or no? The point is not only to solicit feedback, it's also to kind of start using some of the color, the verbiage that the customer is actually telling you. I mean, that's gold. And to start working that into potential marketing material, ultimately that value proposition, that point of difference. Right? This is real gold because it's coming from the customer's mouth.
So you're kind of letting them set their own books.
Absolutely. I mean, who else would you want it to come from? And again, I really, my final slide is the reason for all of this. Well, I don't want to steal away from that, but it goes back to that idea that we're sometimes our own worst enemies, and our intuition, however good we may think it is oftentimes wrong, right? There's a reason most startups fail. And oftentimes there's just not a substantive market that's willing to actually pay for, what you thought was the best thing since sliced bread. And so if you can just simply let the customer lead you down that path, by giving you cues that, hey, this is something of interest, this is something that I would probably pay for, and this is how I'm beginning to understand the world that you're building. I mean, that's just great.
So Jamie, I'm actually a going concern, and when I purchased the company, the previous owner had designed a circuit board for a customer. Mm-hmm. Customer called me today, a year and a half later, and said, asked me about something separate. I did this crazy thing and I asked him, hey, how's that circuit board working? Battery keeps dying. I can fix that. So it was just asking them, inquiring, just asking, how's that product working? Well, and responding to that example, specific situation, saying, well, we can take care of that.
Yeah.
We can put a lithium battery in there, take 10 years.
Yeah.
But they hadn't even thought to come back because they thought that they had failed in their design specs to the designer. Mm-hmm. So they were kind of embarrassed by it. I was like, well, no. Yep. We'll take care of that. Give us a couple.
I mean, that's a great world example, and that's one of that it's an established entity, and so it's always great to see examples in which these types of I guess insights can be applied not to just the startup process, but even an evolving company. Yeah.
That's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
That's great. Works.
Tom, my good friend back there, the resident and marketer, I guess, right, of Elliott Rand. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, isn't it always like gold on a platter to kind of solicit and begin to kind of get some of that marketing copy from the actual customers who are potentially going to buy from you?
You get to work really hard to get customers, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. That doesn't usually happen quickly.
Yeah, so I think that's I think what I'm ultimately going to close on is how do you create scenarios in which you're going to get that most honest feedback. And I think if you whittle these questions down to, again, yes or no, you're going to eliminate them offering up any feedback. If you're asking your mom and dad or family, which oftentimes early stage startup entrepreneurs do, you're probably going to get some type of one-sided response. and so on. I think this is really insightful, this one. You know, has the customer that you're talking to, you know, sought any way to try to solve the situation on their own? We always hear that you don't want to create wants, you want to create needs for customers, or you really want to solve a pain point. And I think the sooner you can kind of really identify customers that are actually having a pain point, that really need a solution, I mean, those are the best ones.
The Google self-driving car is so on the target. I mean, we live in the woods, and I can see a car that's texting. I went into the city yesterday. Every car's texting.
Yeah.
It's like bumper cars on 93.
Yep.
And to think that they're identifying the pain before people even know they're in the pain.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that leads to another question of how do you know when a solution is too early?
Right.
You know, because I've been part of several startups that the solution has ultimately been picked up. But the point of pain for the startup was that they thought that the window of opportunity was, 2 years. The window of opportunity ended up being 7 years long.
Yeah.
Before the market was ready for it. And I'm wondering if Google is in that.
So, I mean, I think that's a little bit different case. I think, Google has the luxury a little bit to,
They have plenty of money.
well, I mean, to their credit though, they're trying to solve potentially really big problems that maybe for most of us are a want right now. I mean, I don't know if I'd pay the premium to have a self-parking car or whatever, but they have the luxury to, and I think the foresight to invest for that long run. But in the short term, that I think that you gave the example of, the challenge and hopefully some of the insights here is that the sooner you can realize that maybe this market that I thought was only 2 years is so much better. I mean, think about the pain and the anguish that those entrepreneurs could have potentially avoided had they really put forth the sweat equity and the effort to really understand that market to see if these people were ready to
Well, I would dialed it back a little bit and had a gradual increase instead of wanting 100% of it today.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll give you a perfect personal example. So, when I did my undergraduate at Princeton, and when I was an undergraduate there, I started a company in the audience response system industry. So, everybody familiar with these little audience response? Do you understand what Jamie's saying? Hit 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for maybe. And that was big in corporate America, where a lot of corporations would kind of use this with their speakers and focus groups, et cetera. And the idea that my roommate and I had was to take that concept of real-time feedback and put it into these large lecture halls at these big universities in which there was hundreds of people, and so the students could provide real-time feedback to the professor. Right, kind of change the dynamic. I mean, you can probably already see the slippery slope that's going for us associated to higher ed. And so, being, I guess, naive at the time, we kind of just went ahead and built a product. Built a product and figured, hey, this is pretty cool that people will quickly adopt it or whatever. And sure, we got some of those low-hanging fruit, those early adopters that they call. But there's also this other great concept of crossing this chasm to the mass market, which was a little bit tougher. And so had we, I think, done a little bit greater homework up front about how professors adopted new technology, who they adopted it from, what was the cycle, et cetera.
Whether they even wanted feedback.
Whether they wanted it, right? I mean, think about it, that's an entrenched market that has a certain way of doing it. And our business model was, we were going to try to just sell to departments, sell to maybe the professor, these seat licenses, just very, very standard. And so this I will never forget, because so many of us think about innovation as it relates to coming up with the new product or the new technology. But I experienced both all of this that I'm talking about, as well as innovation around the sales model, because another competitor that was doing the exact same thing had a product that was hardware based. So our product was just software. It was built into PowerPoint. it made PowerPoint interactive, and it leveraged any browser-based device that one had with them. So at the time, this was 2000, 2001, campuses were investing in wireless. Students had these Palm Pilots that were out there. I mean, just thinking back, you know. Students were moving from desktops to laptops. So they had all this like mobile hardware. And so we figured, you know, hey, that would be the way to do it. A competitor comes on the scene that actually sells hardware. It was this little hardware device. So they were selling hardware and software. Ours was we were banging on the door of all these, you know, departments and trying to, you know, pretend, Mark, you're the professor. You know, Professor Saddam, would you, you know, like to, you know, purchase 30 seat licenses for your classroom? And the answer would be no, right? I mean, A, the budgets are tight. This is more of a want than a need. This competitor comes on and says, you know, Professor Saddam, can we, you know, bring this technology to your classroom? I mean, yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting. I maybe could, you know, play around with it, but I don't have, that's okay. That's okay. Simply tell your students to go to the bookstore and purchase this little device with their textbook. And that was the innovation around it, where they took that weight off of it. Because you did have some professors that, you know, are eager to try different things, but they removed the entire kind of pricing thing off the table, or the actual buying, and pushed it to the students. So I thought that was fabulous. But had I solicited more feedback from the audience that I was going after, A, maybe I would have ultimately discovered that pricing strategy of, hey, you know, it's better if students bought it. But I would have also probably understood that, you know, the higher ed selling to professors is a different market that maybe I didn't appreciate.
Jamie?
Yes.
Just to comment on the Google car, you know, you also have to be careful, I think, that you don't oversell the solution. Self-driving car does not reduce traffic. You're still stuck in traffic going 5 miles an hour on 93. And in terms of the spacing, unless every single car on the road is a Google car, is a self-driving car, it's not going to increase that ground speed. It'll probably eliminate, when there's an accident on 95 south, your car won't slow down on 95 north, so you can look at it.
But that's why.
That problem.
That's why these big companies have this little division called labs,
Right.
where these crazy scientists get to play, and
You can argue.
that's a little bit of that.
Transit solves that problem too.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's. I think shelving that for a second, I think the reason we're all engaging in this is we don't have the time, luxury, capital to go out, you know, these cycles of years in the hopes that something takes. Right, so we need to kind of close that
Maybe there's also the good enough model by Chesbro. If you come out with something way up front, you're going to look for the early adopters, the people who don't, even though your performance may not be as good as the incumbent, there are other features and aspects of it that make it better. I was at Polaroid Digital Photography. We had instant film, but some business people were really interested in being able to move images around, and that was the early adopter, even though the quality was not good. And then over time, eventually the quality got good enough that it came up the line and consumers started to buy it. The curve was much longer than any of us thought, but it did happen, and when it did, it went fast. Probably faster than some of our models went. So.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great point. Maybe the only difference is again maybe they had the luxury of a little bit more capital to kind of hang on, you know, a little bit longer, right? I mean, ultimately, but for the time.
The point is to really poke around and understand which customers need the feature set that you have, and so it supports your point to go out and talk.
I mean, again, I think the desire of all of us is to actually create a product and service that the market wants, and so part of this exercise is. Sure, we all have maybe our domain expertise and the potential products and services that jazz us up. But if those don't fit a marketplace, I mean, at the end of the day, creating a profitable business is, again, just this customer match with the product and service that you want to build. So part of the strategy here is not only testing your own ideas, but hopefully interviewing folks and getting feedback that lead you to potential products and services as well. And then just the last one is, you know, ultimately if people are trying things that aren't working out, that gives you great insight in terms of just the competitive advantage that your idea may be able to provide. Because if you go back to that canvas that I showed earlier, part of that is coming up with that unique value proposition, also known as maybe your pitch, that really hones the points of differentiation between you and what other people are using.
Jamie, one of the benefits about that question, I think, is that you're asking your customers to tell you what you should do. You know, what don't you like about what you've tried? Well, it doesn't do X, Y, or Z. These things don't exist. So I have trouble with that, and they're giving you a pathway to develop something that they need.
Yeah.
And I think that's the simplest, almost most elegant question of the 5.
Well, and that's why I was keeping it to your question of, why don't you lead with like, hey, what do you think about this? Right. Is because it's 2 yes or no, right? So telling your idea, showing your idea to prospective customers, you rather kind of position it as again getting them to talk about, the pain point. Yeah.
Jamie, I think there's a couple pieces in working with customers or clients. Have them tell you more. Really draw them out. The more you can have them tell you more, how do you feel about that? Because people buy from the heart, right? They justify it intellectually, but if you can tell them, hey, tell me more. Is there more to that? How does that make you feel? It really makes a huge difference in customer engagement. And secondly, I heard a great statement. I don't remember whether it was Steve from Apple, but he said something. There was a famous line about, improvement can make you financially rich, but innovation can make you famous. So you have to kind of check your ego kind of at the door and kind of say, am I trying to go too far out there with innovation? Or am I looking at improving a model, which I can do? It's within my ballpark.
Yep.
I just need my ecosystem to come around and partner with me to help me do that.
Yep. No, so that improvement versus innovation is, I think, the same difference between the principles that we're going through tonight versus that visionary. Right? I mean, some people, that's a changing the world in a very visionary way is great. It does happen. I mean, I think that Henry Ford quote was a great example of that. It does happen. It's just the majority of times I think we need to realize that distinction. Correct. Some of it is ego-driven. Some of it is the intuition that we can really accomplish that. But we miss the sight that it also does take real-world principles of you need capital. Capital is limited. You need people to actually buy to sustain that and actually grow that. And that's, I think, what sometimes people discount, that reality.
Well, I think, too, the American business model is innovation. Mm-hmm. The Korean business model is improvement. Mm-hmm. And so, lots of times as Americans, we have to step back and say, is there a better opportunity here to improve than to innovate? And innovate at a later date, because I think we get too wrapped up in innovation.
So I think you see this a little bit with the Apple of the present day,
exactly.
And Tim Cook, right? I mean,
he's more of an improver than an innovator.
But over time, those I think improvements do amount to something.
Apple of the present day, Tim Cook.
So the current CEO of Apple Computers, as opposed to Steve Jobs, which I think maybe many of us view as kind of this grandiose innovator, visionary. I think that's kind of maybe some of the points of differentiation between the Apple of old and the Apple of today.
Ford's statement is really defines that he did do his customer research. He knew they wanted faster horses. Mm-hmm. He didn't tell them he was going to give them a faster horse. Right. So how do you want to get? Well, I want to get there faster. I want to get there at night. I'd like to stay dry when it rains.
Yeah.
So he took those ancillary questions.
Yep.
He did do his customer research. He did know that they wanted faster horses.
Yeah. No, I mean I think that's a fair point. So I guess maybe he just had the I guess the chutzpah to kind of take that a step further and really push the envelope, right?
Yeah, but you should be able to do that in baby steps. If your customer says they want X, Y, and Z, you have to identify which X, Y, or Z is the most important. And I've known so many products that have died on the vine because we always want to innovate. We always want to give the best product out there. And if you just get your first generation product out there and have the mindset that you're going to obsolete yourself, it's critical to building your customer base and giving the customer what they want.
Yeah, I mean, innovation is kind of grandiose, and starting out, to have a grandiose vision, I think what happens with a lot of us is you just don't accomplish that. Right? You don't take those little steps to accomplish it.
The fear, though, is that somebody's going to come and do it better and faster than you, then you can, improve it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else is going to come in and see your idea and then take it a step further faster than you can do it yourself.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the so maybe I'll just close with two quick points. So the concept of this customer development really is focused around interview versus survey. I do think oftentimes in the lean startup, some of the go-to actions are just create a Survey Monkey survey, throw that out to 100 people, see what type of feedback you get, and sure that may give you a little bit of a starting point and insight, but I think it's a lame, weak effort, to be honest. Right? It's easy. A lot of people can do that, etc. Interviewing is and actually talking to customers is a little bit tougher. So I think the common struggles just people face when they're kind of interviewing is you do have the temptation to kind of get defensive because you do have this this vision of what you have come up with in the back of your head. And so I think check the ego at the door, let people just speak. You're going to be the better for it. I mean, we kind of spoke to this a little bit. Just the desire to call the after you have completed several interviews that it's good enough. You kind of have gotten enough feedback. Avoid yes men. That's why I said your parents and your family are kind of your worst probably potential interviewers. And I think that goes ahead with just some people in our natural network that are not part of our family. We want to avoid people that are just going to kind of give us affirmative statements.
It's interesting, and I think one of the books I've been reading, they said of your social circles, if you want to look at Facebook or LinkedIn for your connections, look for the people you didn't want to associate with in high school, because you want they are connected to you, but you want to reach out to the fringe of your network, because the people that are close to you are going to be your yes men, and you want to step outside of that
Absolutely.
group and go for the people that I'm going to use the
Yeah, I always think about it. If I was going to create a product tomorrow, I mean, how many of us fall into this trap? Like, oh, I know I can get like $50, $100 from like 50 of my closest friends or whatever. They'll all buy it because it's coming from me. Those are the people you want to avoid, because what they do is they give you false positives. So that's I think the trap people fall in with yes men.
use your network, but go to the other.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
But at some point, don't you want to square off the surveys that are out there for your industry or market segment with your interviews that are more of an incidental type of data or type of feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think surveys can definitely act as a starting point, and so I encourage it. It's just when you think about this competitive landscape, and you said to it, the fear of somebody coming up and doing something similar and a little bit better. The competitive advantage one has with this customer development and interview process is at the end of the day, it is difficult. It takes a lot of effort. And I would say, I mean, again, I've been around startups for close to 15 years now. Most people aren't willing to commit that type of effort. They create these end conclusions in their heads. Either it's just intuitions, they put out the survey, they get the feedback they want, they talk to mom and dad, there's validation, they feel good, and they're off to the races at building this product. And they invest $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, and they might as well junk it. And so the big differentiation here is sweat equity of getting out and touching the world and actually interacting and maybe getting some rejection is not fun, it's not easy, but it is a point of differentiation that I think you will be more competitive against others.
I think it's also wise to get wise counsel from people who have done it and other people who are good in services, because there are simple little differences in words you might use. So if you use why, people might feel like they're interrogating. If you use reason, oh yeah, okay, here's the reason. And do you know what I mean? They'll be less defensive for a reason than they would be with why.
Yep, as well as on the other side, maybe don't read too much into the cues that a customer is giving you, either on the affirmative or the negative side. So again, that's why I called it this art of customer development. Some of the questioning is again around that. Words do matter. How do kind of read these things matter, etc. The last point is probably on the other end. You get all this great feedback from these customer interviews. what do you do with it? In that earlier graphic, it was you're going to, depending on the validation points, you're going to cycle back and pivot and kind of start again. But should you pivot? Are you giving in too easily? Right. So how do you kind of begin to kind of evaluate the feedback that's coming from customers? And I think that's an art too.
Can you give us an idea of, in a startup environment, what you're seeing the time period of this initial acquisition is?
So of actually going through this interview process. So I think the goal is to do it as soon as possible. So
What's typical is what I'm asking, that you're seeing right now in the marketplace?
I would say it would probably be fair to take a month.
Okay.
I sometimes think, somewhere between, 50, 75 real kind of touch points of getting some feedback. Maybe even 100 is good, depending on from kind of that survey to the full interview. But I mean, the spirit of Lean Startup, let me not fool you, is definitely one around speed, right? The person that wins is who can kind of complete this process like faster and do it the right way. And I think hopefully the greatest takeaway is not actually providing many answers. It's just that the process takes effort, and there are a lot of variables, and hopefully you can equip yourself with, hey, what are the right answers? What are the right cues to determine if they're really telling me what they're telling me?
So Jamie, anecdotally, what kind of experience do people have when they actually go to do this in terms of the receptiveness of the person that they've identified that they'd like to full interview? And I guess to how direct are people being in kind of disclosing why they're talking to this person? Do you try to have kind of a casual conversation? I mean, some people here have talked about interviewing customers. I'm not talking about that where you've already got in a relationship and you're kind of extending it. But where you've identified the friend of a friend, so you've got that arm's length relationship, and you need to reach out to them proactively and give them some idea why you're talking to them, I assume.
Yeah.
Or unless you're lucky enough to be at the dance studio and kind of, lean your way into a conversation where you get some of this intelligence without sort of being more direct about it. I guess I'm curious about.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So forgive me maybe for not defining the word customer as I've been using it. So customer I've been using is a potential customer. So not an established relationship. It could be that like somebody introduces me to Mark Saddam. I know he's kind of in this world of X. No, and I'm definitely upfront with him saying, hey, can I take you out for lunch or whatever? I want to pick your brain. I do X, but I've been thinking about building something, and I wanted just to kind of talk to you about it and get some insights from you. So I think that's how it's more natural. You're not leading with, again, the specific idea, but you're definitely being upfront, saying, I want to pick your brain about something. I want to get some feedback and color on how you view the world because I have some information about him. Was that kind of?
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to keep it much more natural than anything else. Mark?
I just was going to say that I think people have way too much fear about picking up the phone or sending an email and reaching out to people that they don't know. And that's what you have to be willing and able to do. And the thing that I think people find is that there's a responsiveness. I mean, generally speaking, if people have a little bit of time, they're willing to try to help somebody with the project they're working on. I know, for example, Doug Henderson here, who has a company called Frost Hub, he's on the phone constantly, reaching out through iterations of people that he's finding on LinkedIn to talk to them about the application that they're developing among a certain set of potential customers. And he's doing that many, many, many times. The other thing I was going to say on the cycle part is that one of the things that I heard somebody say recently is we don't look at our burn rate. I think that the notion was that the burn rate isn't how much money you spend every month and when you're going to get to zero. The burn rate is really how many cycles can you do on the amount of money you have in the bank. How quickly can you move through cycles of customer interaction and customer feedback on a certain amount of capital that you might have to get through that process.
But you hit it on the head.
That's how people talk about how fast it needs to be.
Correct. But you hit it on the head. I mean, the biggest challenge is, people just don't put forth the effort. Why? Because whether it be, if you want to call it cold calling or whatnot. I mean, I think you can probably find some people in the network that can maybe avoid that. But it's tough. There's some rejection. People may crap on your idea, and people fear that. I think that's just the honest truth.
Well, I think you have to know who your end customer is too. I've seen a lot of people that have done consumer electronics products, for instance, thinking that the consumer was their end customer, was their end user, was their customer, when in fact the distribution channel was their customer.
Yep.
That if you couldn't get it into the distribution, cell phones are a perfect example. When digital cell phones first came out, if the carrier didn't want to offer you a cell phone, it didn't make any difference if you made a great phone.
Yeah. And so, yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. Again, I touch on it, but just to put it out there, you also want to, take all this and maybe share it with your council, the people around you. Say you've gone through this process, you've amassed all this feedback. Because I do think the culture of startups these days, this word pivot, changing up one's plans and one's kind of path is definitely in vogue. And I think sometimes maybe people do it a little bit too quickly and a little too easily.
So I think, to avoid the pivoting too quickly thing, and getting back to your great question about how do you enter into that, really, love causes people to flow in conversations, right? When they're talking about somebody they love, their baby, their company, right? They talk too much. But you can get them to talk, just curiosity, getting them to talk about what they love. What stops that are things like frustration, heartburn, and things like that. So to put this in a context, Silicon Valley, one of the guys that I work with out in Silicon Valley, one of my mentors was all about, look, this is how the executives were messaging it. What kind of heartburn do you have about X, Y, Z? Now how are you handling it right now? That was the C-level, at the net kind of playing tennis.
Yep.
And that's what they were responding to, they're open to. So you can listen to that, get them talking about what they love, but then what do they hate, what's frustrating about it? You find your own language.
Yeah.
But that's usually what will prompt those major improvement or innovation steps.
Yeah, AKA pain point, right? I mean, those are
Correct.
choose your.
Correct.
But anecdotally, I think what happens is people are willing to kind of share some of that, and the ones that do, I think then you realize that is actually a deep frustration that they carry out.
Another thought I have that I think might be worth sharing is that you start in this process and you'll find that a lot of people are going to be telling you the same thing. And so you think you've heard it all after you've talked to 10 people or something. And the reality is that everybody's going to tell you 90% of it might be the same thing. And what you really need to be listening for is the other 10%, because it's the other 10% that's going to be critical to the decisions you're making. And that's why, even though you're hearing a lot of the same stuff over and over, you should continue in the process anyway, because it's the 10% that are going to add up.
And so that's why I'll just conclude with this. That's why I make this point of differentiation between interview and survey. I think a lot of people could do surveys. You can do it in the comfort of your home with your pajamas on. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of hunger to actually get out there, put yourself out there. And I think that's the big differentiation. That's the factor X that'll give you a lot of input. So I know some of you have questions. I'm more than happy to hang around, stay in touch. I got an easy email address, not hard to forget. So please reach out. I'm more than happy to help any way I can. Thank you all very much.
So the way the quote that I heard that I think describes this all best was from Steve Blank, who said that there's never been a business model that survived the first interaction with a customer. So you write the plan.
That was by Mike Tyson.
As soon as you talk to the first customer, your plan goes away. And so, the startup mode is really an idea in search of a business model, or a business plan is a business model in search of a customer. And you can see where the business plan sort of sticks you a little harder, where the things that Jamie were talking about finding customers and figuring out what people are so that you go to them versus building Taj Mahal and finding out nobody likes it. Is a great way to simplify. So great. So we're beer and snacks. Enjoy yourself. It's not as cold as you think it would be. The deck's kind of nice. So have a good time.
If you do go out.